Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. For 3 years, Alexander Carter, CEO of Carter Industries, had been in a mysterious sleep. 3 years of silence, 3 years during which his empire faltered without him, and his personal life was frozen in time. The accident had been sudden, a combination of extreme fatigue and cerebral shock, leaving doctors helpless. The most optimistic spoke of a miracle, the more realistic whispered of the tragedy of a life cut short. In a small neighboring town, the Lawson family lived modestly. Their old, cozy house smelled of polished wood and the fragrance of garden flowers. Emily, the youngest daughter, lived in the shadow of her ambitious and domineering mother. The young girl was gentle, reserved, and dreamed of true love, far from the intrigues of the wealthy world. But her mother, seeing in Alexander a way to propel the family into security and prestige, made a decision that would change Emily's life forever. A wedding was arranged in utmost secrecy. Emily, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, stood before the sleeping man. Her heart throbbed with fear and rebellion. She signed the official papers, sealing a fate she hadn't chosen. No one knew how a bride's kiss could awaken a man from a coma, but Emily, in an inexplicable impulse, brought her lips close to Alexander's, as if to seal a silent promise. At that precise moment, the air seemed to vibrate around the bed. The machines blinked, the CEO's heart rate quickened, and a deep breath swept through the room. His eyelids fluttered, and Alexander finally opened his eyes. 3 years of sleep vanished in an instant. His eyes, once calculating and cold, met Emily's, who took a step back, both frightened and fascinated. Fate had just struck, brutally and irresistibly. This forced marriage, which had seemed a mere administrative formality, had just become the starting point of a story full of secrets, passions, and unexpected revelations. Emily had just awakened Alexander, but she had no idea what this gesture would unleash. Alexander Carter blinked, still disoriented. The soft light of the suite struck him after 3 long years of darkness. Every sound seemed strange, the ticking of a clock, the low hum of medical machines, and Emily's breath, frozen beside him. He tried to speak, but his voice was weak, hoarse, almost foreign to his own ears. "Where am I?" he murmured. Emily took a step back, her heart pounding. You're awake. Mr. Carter." Her voice trembled with fear and excitement. She didn't know whether to run away or stay. Alexander tried to sit up, and a flood of memories overwhelmed his mind, the crash, the accident, and then, nothing. 3 years of emptiness. And now, there was this woman, a stranger yet strangely familiar, standing beside his bed. He studied her face. "Who are you?" he asked, still breathless. I'm Emily Lawson, your wife." Her voice was almost a whisper. She didn't dare add that she had been forced into this marriage by her mother. Alexander looked at her, his eyes narrowed, perplexed. "Wife?" he repeated, as if the word were foreign to him. The initial shock gave way to curiosity. Despite his coma, Alexander felt an undiminished inner strength, control, intelligence, and a certain coldness he couldn't hide. Emily felt a shiver run through her. He was exactly as he had been in the photos, imposing, charismatic, but distant. Why am I married?" he finally asked, his voice firmer, almost authoritative. Emily felt her heart sink. How could she explain that everything had been arranged by her mother? How could she explain that fate had placed a kiss between them? Before she could answer, Alexander sat up slightly, taking her hand firmly yet gently. "Emily, tell me everything." His gaze was piercing, incapable of lying. She knew he would soon discover the truth, whether she wanted him to or not. At that precise moment, Emily understood that her life had just changed. The sleeping CEO was no longer a stranger. He was awake, alert, and every gesture, every word would be a test, a challenge. And behind that authoritative gaze, she already sensed a spark, a promise of passion, conflict, and revelations that would transform their destinies forever. The next morning, Alexander Carter got up for the first time in 3 years. Every movement reminded him of his strength, his authority, and above all, the immense control he had always exerted over his life. But now, everything seemed strange: a marriage he had never chosen, a stranger standing by his side, and a family waiting for him, or rather, waiting for him for his advantages. Emily had prepared breakfast in heavy silence. Alexander sat down at the table, observing every gesture, every movement. His gaze wasn't just curious, it was calculating. "So, you live here?" he asked, his voice calm but demanding. Emily nodded shyly. "Yes. I live here with my mother and sister, but I don't know if you—" She stopped, unable to finish her sentence. Alexander smiled slightly, a rare smile, a smile that sent shivers down Emily's spine. "What are you afraid of?" "That I won't believe you." Before she could answer, the door burst open. A stern-faced woman entered, imposing, Emily's mother, Margaret Lawson. Her gaze immediately fell on Alexander. "So, you're awake, finally." "I was beginning to lose patience." Her voice was icy, sharp, but beneath it lay a worry she was trying to conceal. Alexander jumped to his feet, feeling his imposing presence take over. "And you are?" he asked, his tone neutral yet commanding. Margaret shivered slightly. She hadn't expected him to reassert his authority so quickly. "I am Margaret Lawson. Emily's mother." The tension rose immediately. Alexander observed the house, noting every detail: the modest furniture, the family photos, the worried and calculating glances. He quickly realized that this family had its secrets, and probably, that this marriage hadn't been for love. Later that day, as Emily was showing Alexander around, he gently placed his hand on hers, startling her. "Why are you here, Emily? Why did you marry me?" he asked calmly, but each word carried weight. Emily looked down, unable to answer aloud. Her silence was a mixture of fear, respect, and perhaps the first stirrings of feeling. Alexander then understood something essential: this marriage was not just a formality. He was at the center of a web of lies and family manipulation. And he would decide, as always, to take back control. But deep down, a new feeling was taking hold, a curiosity for this sweet and shy young woman who had dared, with a kiss, to awaken the sleeping CEO. The day wore on, but Alexander couldn't tear his mind away from the secrets that seemed to hang over the house. He had observed every glance, every gesture, and one certainty became clear: this marriage had never been motivated by love. After lunch, he asked Emily to stay with him in the living room. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft, almost deceptive light. Alexander glanced at Margaret, who entered with an overly perfect smile, trying to hide her anxiety. "Margaret, we need to talk." His voice was calm, but sharp as a scalpel. Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you want to talk about, Alexander?" She tried to hide her nervousness. Alexander sat down, his piercing gaze fixed on her. "This marriage, why? You know I was in a coma. You married your daughter to a man incapable of giving consent. Why?" Margaret swallowed. She knew she couldn't lie. "Alexander, it was for Emily, for her safety, to secure a future." She tried to make her act seem noble, but the truth tasted bitter. Alexander stood imposingly, his presence filling the room. "Security? You used my fortune as a safety net for your family? You manipulated Emily." His tone was firm, but not cruel. He wanted to understand, and take control. Emily, silent until now, trembled slightly. She knew Margaret was right in a way: she had been protected, but at what cost? Alexander turned to her. "Emily, is it true? You agreed to this marriage?" The young woman lowered her eyes, ashamed and confused. I had no choice. Mom," she murmured. Alexander felt his heart sink, but his logic wouldn't allow him to give in to pity. "So we'll sort this out. But know this, I decide what happens now. A new tension arose between them. Alexander had regained control, but Emily felt a mixture of curiosity and admiration, tinged with fear. She couldn't deny that this authoritarian and imposing man awakened emotions in her that she had never known before. Margaret realized she had underestimated the CEO. And Alexander understood he had just stumbled upon a crucial truth: this marriage wasn't a simple arrangement. It was the beginning of a complex game of power, manipulation, and perhaps budding love. As he left the living room to consider his next steps, his gaze met Emily's. A silent spark passed between them, fragile yet undeniable. This kiss, this wedding, this awakening, it was all just the beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions for Alexander. Awakened after 3 years, he had to regain control of his empire while navigating the turbulent waters of this arranged marriage. But one thing was clear: Emily, sweet and shy, had awakened something in him he had never felt for anyone before. That morning, Alexander decided to take her to his personal office at the family business. The panoramic view of the city reminded him that the world kept turning, that he had to act quickly to protect his interests, and, paradoxically, Emily. She walked beside him, silent, impressed by the natural authority that emanated from him. She felt her heart beat faster every time his gaze fell upon her. In the office, surrounded by files and financial reports, Alexander sat behind his enormous glass desk. Emily. I want you to understand one thing: you're not just my wife on paper. You're the center of my life now. But I can't leave you alone in this world, not with your manipulative mother, and not with those who might take advantage of you. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She was both intimidated and fascinated by this powerful, protective authority. Alexander. I never wanted any of this, she murmured. He stood, moved closer to her, closing the distance between them. I know, and that's why I decide now. You are under my protection. And you will stay with me, whether you like it or not. The accidental touch of their hands made Emily's heart race. She looked away, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. Alexander, attentive, noted every reaction, every shiver, every heartbeat. It was clear that this arranged marriage was about to become something more complex, and more intense. Shortly after, Margaret entered the office, hoping to regain control. But Alexander, impassive, fixed her with an icy stare. Mrs. Lawson, I advise you never to manipulate Emily again. Any attempt will be considered a direct threat against her, and against me. Margaret stepped back, surprised by the CEO's audacity. For the first time, she understood that she was no longer in control. And Alexander, observing Emily, felt a new emotion. Not only did he have to protect her, but he was beginning to desire her presence, her gentleness, her innocence mixed with a latent courage. That evening, as they found themselves alone in the large house, Alexander took Emily's hand, gently but firmly. You know, the kiss that woke me, it didn't just break my sleep. It awakened something else. His eyes shone with a new intensity. Emily felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was no longer just an arranged marriage. It was the beginning of a passionate and dangerous bond, where power and desire intertwined inexorably. Night had fallen on the Lawson mansion, and the silence seemed heavy with promise and unspoken tension. Alexander had retreated to his study to reflect, but his thoughts kept returning to Emily. Every gesture, every shiver he had observed in recent days reminded him that she wasn't just his wife on paper, she had become essential to his heart and mind. Emily, too, sat in her room, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about their closeness, the unexpected gentleness behind Alexander's authority, the warmth of his hands when he protected her. A mixture of fear, admiration, and desire consumed her. She knew he was powerful, that he could dominate or protect, and strangely, she wanted to be under his protection. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Alexander entered, simply dressed but imposing in his presence. Emily, we need to talk. His voice was firm but imbued with a rare intensity. She stood, her heart pounding, sensing that this moment would change everything. He moved closer, closing the distance between them, and for the first time, he looked at her with a vulnerability he never showed to anyone else. Since I woke up, I haven't just taken back my life. I've discovered something, you. Emily felt her cheeks flush. Me. But I didn't do anything, she whispered. Alexander gently placed a hand on her cheek, making her tremble. No, you did everything. Your courage, your gentleness, and that kiss, it awakened my heart as much as my body. I want this marriage to stop being a formality. I want it to become real, I want it to become us. Emily felt tears welling up. She hadn't expected to hear those words. 3 years of silence, 3 years of anguish, 3 years of manipulation, and now, this man, this ruthless but passionate CEO, was opening his heart to her. Without thinking, she looked up at him, and in an irresistible impulse, she threw herself into his arms. Alexander embraced her with both strength and tenderness, sealing the moment with a passionate yet tender kiss, a mixture of desire and promise. In that kiss, all the fears, all the pain of the past evaporated. They were no longer an arranged marriage, nor two strangers bound by papers. They were two awakened souls, linked by an unexpected destiny, a kiss that had changed the entire course of their lives. And as the moon illuminated their embrace, Alexander whispered to Emily, "We will face this world together, and nothing and no one can separate us." Emily smiled, placing a hand on his chest to feel his heart beat in unison with hers. This was no longer a forced marriage. It was a budding, passionate, and invincible love. Fate had intervened, and this time, it had chosen the path of the heart.